The practice of archaeological site reconnaissance falls within the Western scientific tradition and relies on consistent methodology, precise measurement, and sampling strategies. However, there is also an experiential element to archaeological survey in which practitioners consciously and unconsciously observe patterns in the field that lead them to hunches or gut feelings that drift beyond quantifiable empirical observation. While such hunches are occasionally crafted into hypotheses, they are more commonly shared and discussed among practitioners without finding their way into the official project record. The experiential knowledge obtained through archaeological survey is the result of accumulated observations of archaeological and geographic phenomena, as well as interactions with the environment. From this perspective, there is a connection with forms of traditional knowledge, especially those related to experiential knowledge acquisition and reading landscapes. This paper explores the premise of archaeological survey as a form of traditional knowledge. The origin of this paper lies in the forests and swamps of the Upper Great Lakes region while digging thousands of shovel tests and walking transects through thickets and attempting to swat the flies and mosquitoes who were intent on sucking me dry. Needless to say, I became familiar with moving through the landscape while looking for archaeological sites. Are the slides changing? They're not changing on my screen.
They're not changing for us either. You might have to share a different screen.
Maybe. Though I guess in some ways the slides aren't really that critical. It may just be easier just to keep reading if this is going to be the issue here. But I'll try real quick to share the screen again. All right, so wants me to share screen one. I'll share that and then go into slideshow mode. Is there something showing now?
Yes, we can see this now, and your slides are moving.
Okay, great. So that must have been the problem. So I was just saying that, moving through the landscape while looking for archaeological sites. So I began to wonder at that time why we found sites in some locations and not in others, despite all the transects and shovel tests. In a roundabout way, this became the theme of one of the themes of my dissertation, which explored late pre-contact settlement and subsistence patterns in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and continues in my role on the Chippewa National Forest. One part of my dissertation was the development of an inductive archaeological sensitivity model for the Hiawatha National Forest. This approach assumes that non-cultural characteristics of site location, in this case environmental characteristics, are useful predictors of site location. In other words, I was relying on physical information about site locations to develop generalizations or predictions about other currently unknown late pre-contact sites on the forest. Despite the numerous variables examined, the study determined that the locations of nearly 60% of the late pre-contact sites on the Hiawatha were associated with just two variables. The sites were in mixed pine habitats within 120 meters of a major source of water. These settings were classified as high sensitivity areas. Such areas account for about 3.4% of the land base of the National Forest, and the sites were located on 0.001% of the high sensitivity areas. Although there are many reasonable explanations for why late pre-contact sites are distributed in this way, it still begs the question as why are late pre-contact sites found in some locations but not others? I'm currently working on a sensitivity model for late pre-contact sites on the Chippewa National Forest. It isn't complete yet, but the preliminary results are comparable to what I learned on the Hiawatha. To further explore the question of why archaeological sites are in some places but not in others, I created a questionnaire to quantify the experiential aspect of archaeological survey. The results of the questionnaire may help our understanding of how field experience influences our approaches to archaeological survey. The questionnaire included 32 questions, 28 were multiple choice, and 5 were open-ended. A couple of my Forest Service colleagues provided feedback on the draft questionnaire. 316 people participated in the survey. Most were from the Midwest and Northeast. The responses came from all over the United States and as far away as Central America and the UK. Participants worked across the spectrum of archaeological careers, and some, about 11%, were avocational archaeologists. Nearly 90% of the respondents are regularly engaged in archaeological surveys or looking for archaeological sites. Over 80% employ a formal methodology in this pursuit. In other words, most of the participants were archaeological survey practitioners. The remainder of this presentation will highlight some of the results of the questionnaire, as well as link these results to topics of experiential learning, the acquisition of skills, and traditional knowledge. 90% of the participants believe experience conducting archaeological surveys is a factor in their success in finding sites. Many of the comments emphasize this perspective. For example, Ryan shared that an experienced archaeologist familiar with their local region can anticipate 80 to 90% of the results of an area survey before boots are ever on the ground. Lisa takes a different approach in her comment, noting that methodology is more important for her, but it recognizes that more experienced practitioners often find sites in places where she might not think to look. Over 80% of participants indicated that using intuition as well as experience was important to their ability to carry out surveys. Andrea sees experience as a source of her intuition about site locations. An anonymous respondent differentiated intuition and experience and sees the prediction of archaeological site locations as a skill born of experience, not based on premonition. About 84% acknowledge that they have a feeling or a premonition that a site should be in a place, whether or not they are searching for a site or not. Connie calls this her archaeological spidey sense, and has found that her intuition is often supported through survey and GIS analysis. Likewise, Lee has found that 9 out of 10 times his predictions are right. Connie and Lee, as well as Andrea, are all relying on their experience and familiarity with the landscape to successfully identify sites. Where 90% of the survey participants view the practice of archaeological survey and site identification as a learned or acquired skill. Further, most participants, about 75%, report that they learned this skill through field experience as opposed to books, classroom learning, or guidance from a mentor. The 12% who listed other as a response mostly related that it was a combination of all or a couple of these factors, so experience was still something that they noted in their responses. Regarding this topic, one of my Forest Service colleagues shared that I learned absolutely zilch about prospecting for archaeological sites in the classroom. It was all field-based and experiential, and mentorship of older archaeologists helped. The more you work in a region, the more likely you are to find sites based on your unique intuitive model. Demetra shares a similar perspective, stating that you can read about survey till you're blue in the face, but it's all conceptual until you get out in the field and experience it. Working on archaeological surveys over the years, I often talked with crews about feelings akin to Connie's spidey sense, that a place was likely to produce an archaeological site. Sometimes this was easier to explain. For example, seeing a uniform square or rectangular shape in the field suggests the likelihood of a homestead or logging campsite. The whole nature abhors the straight line approach. Other times, it's more like Lee's experience telling him, I bet there's a site out there on the terrace. Through the course of this paper, we've looked at how archaeologists have thought about the process of archaeological survey as an acquired skill derived from experience. This can be explained through experiential learning. David Kolb, a psychologist and educator, defines experiential learning as the process whereby knowledge is created through the transformation of experience. Knowledge results from the combination of grasping and transforming experience. In this instance, it is learning a process initiated through participating on an archaeological survey, reflecting on that experience, learning from that experience, and acting on and applying what you've learned to your next survey. The process of learning is so natural that people engage in it without even being aware they are learning. It happens almost effortlessly and is reinforced through practice. On the topic of skill, Tim Ingold wrote that to understand the true nature of skill, we must restore the human organism to the original context of its active engagement with the constituents of its surroundings. This sounds a lot like experiential learning, as well as Dimitra's perspective that it isn't real till you get boots, butt, hands on the ground. When we consider the act of archaeological survey as an experiential learning process, which constantly reinforces and expands an acquired skill, it is easy to relate the act of archaeological survey to an acquired skill and a form of traditional knowledge. One of the hallmarks of traditional knowledge is a combination of learning a skill and honing it through practice and experience. When an archaeologist is surveying, they are experiencing the act of survey as well as taking in information about their surroundings through all their senses. Ingold notes that knowledge of the world is gained by moving about in it, exploring it, attending to it, ever alert to the signs by which it is revealed. This thought also captures the essence of archaeological survey for practitioners who are moving through the landscape, ever alert to the signs it may reveal. Ian Davidson Hunt and Fikret Burks similarly relate that a person does not learn a classification of habitats in the abstract, but learns about habitats through experience on the land. Places on the land are not just described as a category of habitat, but as a place with attributes of biophysical characteristics and history. It is not uncommon to hear expressions like, if it looks like a good campsite to you, someone probably camped there before. Or, look for a level terrace on a body of water if you want to find a site. Comments like these appeared in various different forms in the responses to the questionnaire. However, as my late pre-contact archaeological sensitivity model showed, there are a lot more places that match these characteristics than there are archaeological sites. We, as archaeologists, are making finer distinctions based on what we have learned through our journeys and to understand which locales are more likely or less likely to include sites. Another one of my Forest Service colleagues straddled the fence in one of his responses saying, a key to ensuring good survey is teaching good survey methods, then followed this with, one well-placed transect is better than 3 poorly placed transects. Eric is mixing and matching his response when he emphasizes the importance of good survey methods, then suggesting that the method be altered from 3 transects to a single well-placed transect. How is this well-placed transect determined? During the height of the postmodern archaeological movement, Michael Shanks and Randy McGuire called for an archaeology of craft. In their words, a craft archaeology manufactures archaeological knowledge. Archaeological survey is a tool we use in the creation of archaeological knowledge. The experience allows us to wield that tool more skillfully. Considering Eric's comment about the importance of methodology with the caveat that a single well-placed transect is better than 3 poorly placed ones, we are seeing the manufacture of archaeological knowledge. Shanks and Tilley also tell us, or Shanks and McGuire, tell us that a craft archaeology is subversive in that it requires us to resist the dominant structure that shapes archaeological work. In Eric's example, is the objective 3 transect method subverted through the subjectively placed single transect? Eric doesn't go down this rabbit hole, but I think we can safely conclude that the placement of the single well-placed transect is a product of experience, and that experience is a critical facet in the archaeological survey practitioner's toolkit. From my perspective, and that of many of the respondents, it is the journey that is the foundation of the skill or craft of archaeological survey. Walking over and shovel testing locales where sites are not found is just as informative as places where sites are found because we are experiencing a range of conditions and places. Gross characterizations, like a well-drained terrace next to water, are easy, but don't get at the heart of our understanding of the landscape and archaeological site location. Like any traditional knowledge, the skills used by practitioners of archaeological survey are learned through experience and practice. I'm going to wrap up with a quote from the questionnaire. This one comes from James, another Forest Service colleague, and it eloquently addresses Eric's objective-subjective tangle without subverting the dominant structure that shape archaeological work. James writes, quote, the methodology, let me get the slide here, the methodology such as landform-based transect intervals establishes a baseline. Experience informs how to apply variation within that framework. It's sort of like the difference between learning basic chord progressions and being able to solo. I like this perspective as it reminds us that experience provides the skills to successfully conduct archaeological surveys, and sometimes it provides us with more than a feeling. And then the gratuitous Boston meme there.